29th. Would the Secretary please call the roll?
Chair Morgan,
Present.
Vice Chair Weaver, here. Committee Member Connell, Committee Member Glendinning, here. Committee Member Langberg, here. Committee Member West.
Here. All right, thank you. We have an approval of the minutes of our last meeting, which was February 18th. Are there any comments or changes to the meeting notes or yes, the notes of the regular meeting on February 18th? If you can remember back that far. I have none.
Move that the minutes be approved as submitted.
Second to that? Second. All four, say aye.
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 Opposed? Aye. So it passes unanimously, all right. Meetings are good. So are there any changes to the agenda for the meeting?
There are no changes, Mr. Chair.
Okay. At this point, I would ask for any oral or written communications to the board other on items not on the agenda. Seeing none, we will close that portion and move on to the matters at hand. The first item is item 1, preliminary and final design review for an exterior building material and mailbox change for the Village Walk subdivision located at 690 East Cotati Avenue. Is there a staff report, please?
Yes, there is. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, committee members. Thank you very much for making time in your schedules for this special meeting with our current inventory of development projects. It's really kind of a challenge to get them, get you here regularly and still serve the applicants, so we appreciate you making that time. This first item is fairly straightforward. This was a project that was previously approved in 2006 and with a subsequent design modification in 2011. And this one that's coming forward today is a straightforward request for a change in exterior building materials. Along with that, there are no proposed changes in the color palettes for the buildings, simply a change from a partial stucco exterior to 100% siding material. And also a request to replace the mailboxes. This, like many multifamily developments, has what we call gang mailboxes or grouped mailboxes. And the ones that were approved were decorative, black, and set to match the bollards that were chosen. They primarily occur around the public park. And the request is to substitute those for a more modern design that's in a sand-colored or putty-colored finish. And the applicant's reason for the switch out is, excuse me, one, expense, that the decorative ones are more expensive, and because they only come in an 8-drawer model, there are more of them required to serve the total number of units. And also that the black finish just doesn't wear as well as a lighter color finish. It shows marks and abrasions more quickly, so it's more expensive for the homeowners in the future to keep those, harder to acquire them and harder to maintain them. And then, and so that's one request. And the first one, as I said, is the change in exterior building materials. And I think the plan sets showed the comparisons pretty accurate, or pretty well, that most of the stucco finish was on the lower levels of the units and on certain design aspects or certain facades of the upper levels. And the request is to change all of those occurrences of stucco to either a horizontal or vertical siding. And so the proposed siding would all be cement board, hardy plank manufacturer. So staff is recommending the change to the exterior materials, and we at the staff level had not recommended change in the mailboxes simply because of the aesthetics, but we would welcome the committee's feedback on any of those. And I did, for the other committee members, put a copy of the actual color samples up there in a binder for everyone to look at. Again, there's no change in color, but those are a more accurate depiction than the color printer can provide. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Any questions from the committee to the staff? And remember to turn your mics on when you speak. Go ahead.
So there was the question about the mailboxes, and I don't see any images of either the old or the new ones anywhere in our packet. So I feel like I can't make any comment about them when I can't see them.
I apologize for that. There were images in there. Let me see if they didn't make them into the packet.
Yeah, I share the same concern.
Well, I apologize for that. There are depictions, so let us get those together for you, and we can distribute them pretty quickly.
Okay. I mean, we did, the existing ones are approved, and it's just to see the difference would be useful.
Of course it would, yes. Yeah. Sorry.
Any other questions to staff regarding this?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
maybe if we could, if I can rely on the clerk to take notes, I can run and get copies of those depictions and distribute them, but we don't have that many hands.
Please.
So you'll have to excuse me
Please
for a
do.
minute. Okay, thank you.
Any questions of the applicant? The applicant's here, right? Correct? No, applicant is not here. All right. Well, any discussion on the committee about this item, short of not seeing the pictures of the mailboxes?
I have no questions.
Okay.
We're doing questions, you asked for comments.
Comments or questions, yeah.
I have a comment that I don't have a problem with changing the siding, but, yeah, I was wondering about the mailboxes as well. So we'll wait for that one.
Yeah, my question really was about a little bit of the why behind it. I'm sure materials difference, and I have no love of stucco or siding for that matter. But I was just wondering, remembering back to the discussion when we approved, in 2011, when we had that original discussion on that, the concerns were about, solar density and things along those lines, and I don't think there's any appreciable, asking our architects, or if there's any appreciable difference between stucco and hardy plank siding in terms of solar, or, yeah, or just even thermal.
I would say not. The color would be the most impact on thermal.
Okay.
They're both cementitious, and they're both 3/4 of an inch thick or so their mass would be similar.
Okay.
Yeah, I also have no problem with the change. It seems so minimal visually that.
I think what I want to do is I want to move on to the next item. I want to table this for a moment until we get the images, and like to move on to the next item since that's important. But with our, yeah, that was what I was going to ask. So, all right, unless there's any need for any discussion, let's just take a short recess until she returns with the pictures. All right.
Or can we vote on the two items separately if I haven't heard any hot emotions about the change of the stucco? Can we vote on that separately from the mailboxes?
I have no problem if you care to make a motion to such effect.
Okay, then I move that we approve the change from stucco to siding.
I second that.
Any discussion on that? Let's have a roll call vote, please.
Chair Morgan,
Aye?
Vice Chair Weaver,
Aye.
Committee Member Connell, Committee Member Glendinning,
Aye.
Committee Member Langberg, Committee Member West.
Aye.
Okay. Interesting thing to be concerned about a mailbox. I mean, one other question was, are there going to be more mailboxes? I didn't quite get that.
My understanding from what I heard Vicki say is that what was approved, only the smallest size it is 8,
Yes.
which means, and I guess the other ones can come in smaller sizes, so there might end up needing bigger, more unused mailboxes with the approved ones.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
I heard the question about quantity as I came in, so.
Yeah, the question I had was with the black mailboxes, the approved mailboxes, the total number of installations was X, and with the new color, the ones, will there be more than X, more or less than?
Yes, there are 46 ownership units in the development plus 10 second dwelling units, so a total of probably 56 mailboxes. The second units would need their own mail. So with the 8 drawer, as you've got, plus group for larger packages, that would be, that math, 8, 7 or 8 mailboxes.
Okay.
7 would fit theoretically.
Okay. Okay, now that we have the picture here, we can kind of see it. These look familiar. These mailboxes look familiar to me. I had one exactly like this in my old office. Any comment or discussion on the proposed change for the mailboxes?
Could I just clarify so the bollards are approved and staying as is? It's just the mailboxes they want to change.
They are, and the reason for that is a little artificial in that the bollards were approved as part of the public improvements that went in on a set of improvement plans, so they've already been processed and permitted and partially built. And the mailboxes are on landscape plan, which is not yet permitted.
So to clarify that then, so we would be looking at putting these putty-colored boxes on top of the black bollards is what they're proposing.
Not on top of, but they're in proximity around. The first exhibit in your packet is a site plan, and they're all generally, the bollards are lit, illuminated, and they generally surround the public walkways or the walkways around the public park, and that's also where the mailboxes would be located.
Oh, I see, okay.
I have a comment. In my opinion, I don't think that financial reasons are enough to warrant changing to the plain mailboxes. I would not be in favor of that change. I like having the more decorative mailboxes as approved.
I would concur with that.
Well,
Yeah, there's something kind of, I don't know, home, small, towny looking about the approved ones, and the others are very sort of industrial, office,
like, yeah,
institutional looking.
utilitarian, agreed, I agree. Well, does anyone want a motion on this, one way or the other?
Well, I would make a motion that we deny the request to change to the more modern mailbox and we have retained the approved 2011 design.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion on that item? Would you please call the roll?
Chair Morgan,
Aye.
Vice Chair Weaver,
Aye.
Committee Member Connell, Committee Member Glendenning,
Aye.
Committee Member Langberg, Committee Member West.
Aye.
Motion is approved to deny that. Okay, that concludes item 1. So we're going to move on to item 2.
Mr.
Yes?
Chair, if I could clarify, Committee Member Glendenning's motion included an approval of the materials change?
We all, well, you were out.
Oh, while I was
We did
out, you
that
did that.
separately,
Okay,
and that
thank
was
you.
approved.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So moving on to item 2. This is Katati Station Apartments, which is a 74 multifamily unit with 5,540 square feet of commercial space, a public park, and improvement of a city-owned parcel for public parking. And for my clarification, the committee's being asked to provide recommendations or approval on this item?
The request is for a recommendation to the Planning Commission, correct?
Okay. Which could be approval. We're not being asked to provide preliminary design review of this.
You are being asked for preliminary design review recommendation, yes. And if we feel like it's too big of a bite, we can revisit that issue, but that is the request.
Okay, thank you. Is there a staff report?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think you all have met Lori McNabb, who's a consulting planner for the city, and I'm just going to give a few introductory remarks and then turn it over to Lori, who'll do the bulk of the presentation. As you mentioned, we have seen this project before. You viewed it the last time in early spring of 2015, and at that time it was a larger project. It included basically 2 sets of parcels, north and south of the existing development that is on the east side of Santara Way. And at that time, the project went to this body as well as the Planning Commission, and staff was recommending denial both times. And the reason for the denial is intricately connected with the changes that you all will be looking at today. So I just wanted to spend a little bit of time to explain the project to you, because it doesn't, to the eye, the project isn't much different than what it was before, and there have been significant community benefits added to the project. So that is a major change that we'll talk about. And in addition to that, rather than an overall change in the project, what you're going to be looking at is really a change in the regulatory lens with which the city is reviewing the project. So I just want to spend a little bit of time. You're not being asked to look at the policy implications or evaluate state programs, but I'm simply providing this to you for context so that you can understand better both the state of the current project and the questions that we'll be asking you later. State density bonus is a program that was passed by the legislature and now adopted in the state government code back, I believe, in 2004 or 5. It was during one of the past boom cycles of housing, and the state was having a lot of trouble providing affordable housing or providing opportunities for others to develop affordable housing. And so they developed, consistently what they heard from applicants is that local regulations such as setbacks and height made it very difficult for them to achieve the numbers of units that they needed to make the project function financially. And so the state developed what they call a density bonus program or density bonus regulations. And those are the regulations that the applicant has proposed to the city. So I'm just going to walk you through the very basics of how the program works. So these regulations are embedded in the government code, and I've given the citations up here, and they require local agencies to grant a bonus of density and incentives or concessions to applicants that provide any one of the following percentages for a period of no less than 55 years. So the very basic level of qualifying for the program is that 10% of the units are set aside for lower income households, 5% of the units, and these are or statements, 5% of the units are set aside for occupancy by very low income households. It is a age-restricted housing development providing accommodation for senior citizens, or it is 10% of units in a common interest development. That would typically be a condominium development, restricted for occupancy by moderate income households. So, as I said, it's a program that's meant to provide units for lower income housing. The way the process works is that the applicant submits a proposal for specific incentives or concessions that they may want or need. Most cities aren't in a great position to provide incentives usually, so they would typically come in the form of concessions. So local agencies are required under these regulations to grant these concessions unless they can make a written finding to any of these three conditions that I've put up here. So and I'm just going to pause for a minute to see if the audience can see the screen or if it would be helpful if we turn out the lights. Why don't we go ahead and turn them off for just a period. So again, the local agencies must grant the concessions unless you can make findings that the following is the case, that the concession or incentive is not required in order to provide affordable housing. In other words, it's a concession that the developer wants but doesn't need. The concession would have a specific adverse impact on public health and safety, the environment, or a state-listed historical resource. Or third, the concession would be contrary to state or federal law. So really these put most of the burden on the applicant and the decision-making staff and the decision-making bodies to prove that a concession is a want and not a need. And you'll get into those a little bit more with the staff report. The percentage bonus that is allowed under the state program is set forth in this table. The left-hand column is the percentage of very low-income units that are provided, and the right-hand column is the percentage of bonus that would be allowed. So if you take the first one, if 5% of units are restricted for very low-income households, then a bonus of 20% of density is granted. In this case, this project has proposed to restrict 11% of units for very low income and is asking for a 35% bonus in density. And further on into the process, that in terms of the concessions, how many concessions the local agencies are required to grant, I don't need to go through these, I don't think, other than to say it's a choice of 1, 2, or 3 with if the developer is asking for 3 incentives, the percentage of deed-restricted units is higher, as you would expect. So, for example, this project is asking for 3 concessions, and that requires, two concessions, and that requires 20% of the units to be deed restricted to lower income households, at least 10% for very low income households, or at least 20% for moderate income households. And then finally, in addition to granting the concessions or incentives, local agencies are required to grant waivers of any development standard that will have the effect of physically precluding the development from happening. This project is asking for a mix of concessions and waivers, so those 2 terms will be something that we'll come back to later several times. And again, just to be clear, the waivers are development standards that physically preclude the project from occurring. And the applicant has submitted some exhibits that were in your packet to help illustrate those waivers. And as we go forward, I'm going to hand this over to Lori. As we go forward, we'll be asking you to provide feedback not only on the overall design of the project. We want to also focus on, what the project is and the design features that it's bringing to us, as well as these requests for waivers and concessions. And so it's a big set of regulations that are hard to digest in 10 minutes, but what we are recommending is that we go through the project and present the project, and we can answer any questions that you have at that point, either about the regulations or about the project, and or allow the applicant who's here today to also present the project as they see it and then take questions. We can handle that in a number of ways that the chair and the committee wishes to. All right, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lori McNabb.
I'll turn on my mic. So with all that background, everything Vicki said will come back. So it was well worth our time. The project before you today is a 74-unit multifamily development mixed-use project. It has 74 apartment units, and it has a little over 5,000 square feet of commercial space. And I've given the breakdown of the 74 units for you. 6 one-bedroom units, 41 two-bedroom units, and 27 three-bedroom units. This project came before you in early 2015, and I just have the site plan up here just to show you what you saw before. There were 2 different development sites. The applicant was proposing 155 units over the 2 sites. It was a 100% residential project. And because it was 100% residential, they were asking for a amendment to the specific plan, and that was recommended for denial both at the DRC and Planning Commission. Oh, excuse me, Planning Commission and DRC. And with that, the applicant amended their application, and this is what is before you today. It's one project site. It's 74 units on this one project site, and with the proposal, the developer is also proposing to build a public park, which is called for in the specific plan. And the developer is also building a parking lot open to the community that is on a city-owned parcel. The other thing that is occurring with this project is Depot Way, which is right here, will be constructed so that there is an emergency loop for fire truck access to loop through the project if needed.
And if I can interject something quickly, it's hard to see on this site plan, but the parking lot that Lori was just pointing out to the area in blue, this is immediately behind the now constructed Sonoma County Transit parking lot. So this is the vacant lot that's just behind that, the little square indentation that you see, that Lori's pointing out, that is basically the end of the smart platform. So that, to give you some context, is where the parking lot is. So this is the project before us today. The previous project had these 3 long buildings all perpendicular to Santara Way. With this revised project, 2 of the buildings have been rotated around so that they are parallel to Santara Way and giving better street frontage. Most of the units will access off this interior courtyard. The units also have access from a breezeway off of Santara Way. And Building 1 will, the units are, I went to my next slide. Sorry. Building 1, the units access off of the parking area. And the project also, I'm happy about, there will be connectivity to the future park with, there's a crosswalk here, and then there's breezeways through this Building 1 that will lead into the future park. The other thing that changed with this new design, the previous application had their bike parking back in these corners of the project, which staff didn't feel was safe. Those bicycle parking shelters or cabinets have been relocated out here. They do 2 things. They're going to be closer and more usable for the residents, and they also will screen the parking areas. Because the Santara Way specific plan doesn't allow parking lots adjacent to the street. So by designing it this way, there'll be a landscape buffer and an actual structure screening the parking areas. With this project, 106 parking spaces will be provided on site where the apartment buildings are, and there will be 32 parking spaces provided along Santara Way in front of this project frontage and the future park. And if you want to read more about the parking, it's page 34 of your packet, has a whole parking matrix. Another feature of the project staff is recommending, it's condition number 12 in the packet, is staff has recommended that rooftop solar be provided, and the rooftop solar be provided in a way that would provide at least 20% electricity to the development. And I must also say the commercial area is on the ground floor of Building 2 and on the ground floor of Building 1. The anticipated uses are a gym, a leasing office, and then office spec space in this Building 1. And this is a perspective of the project from the Santara Way. So now we're talking about concessions, which Vicki discussed. So the parcel that the applicant is building their project only allows for 48 units in this specific plan, and they're building 74. They're allowed a bonus of density if at least 11% of their units are for very low-income households. They've done that. So because they're providing that low-income housing, they are allowed 2 concessions. And these are the 2 concessions they've asked for. They're asking for a reduction of ground floor commercial. The Santara Way specific plan requires at least 30% of the development be commercial. They're asking to reduce that from 30% down to about 5.5%. And then the other concession they're requesting is an elimination of fenestration. Because this was envisioned as a mixed-use area, the plan calls for at least 50% of the facade to have windows, but because they're building mostly residential, they're wanting a concession and bringing that number down to between 19 and 27%, which makes sense for residential. So as with concessions, the city doesn't have much discretion on whether or not we grant concessions, because the reasons are very narrow for why you can't. Needs to be a fire safety issue or other legal issues that Vicki went over. So those are the concessions that they've requested. They've also asked for waivers, and waivers, there is a little bit more discretion, and the way they are described in the law as a waiver, the developer can ask for a waiver if the development standard as implemented precluded
the density they were trying to propose. So they have asked for these waivers, and many of them make sense. For instance, they need to build a taller building to fit all the units on the property. They need to fit from 2.5 stories to 3 stories. That makes sense. They need to, reducing setbacks, which makes sense. But in going through this, staff felt like 3 of the waivers they're asking for needed more analysis. And those were the required front setback requirement, the building orientation requirement, and the amount of private open space. And in your packet, page 41 through 45, they've given you some exhibits. I'm going to talk about those now, and they're also noted as sheets E1 through E2, etc. So the Santara Way specific plan wants primary building facade to be oriented parallel to Santara Way. And as we talked about with the earlier project, all 3 of their buildings were perpendicular to Santara Way, and the buildings didn't have good frontage along Santara Way. So we asked them to, we talked about having all the building parallel with Santara Way, but they showed us that they can't do that and meet the density they would like. If they made all 3 buildings go parallel with Santara Way, the buildings don't fit on the project, and then it creates a large parking area which is adjacent to the street, which we didn't want. So this is the proposal that they've come up with that staff has worked to come in agreement with, which has greater street presence, and the fact that they've done ground floor commercial in building 1 really helps. So as a visitor to the area, most of the ground floor that you would walk by is commercial up into this point. From this point south, these are residential units. The other waiver that they're asking for is a waiver to the 0 setback. So the Santara Way specific plan envisions mixed-use buildings would be at the sidewalk, like when you go to any downtown, the buildings are at the sidewalk. They said they cannot meet that standard because they are providing ground floor patios for these residential units, and in providing these ground floor patios, they've had to push the building back. And the requirement is 70% of the building needs to be at 0 feet setback, and I believe with this proposal, they're between 4 and 7 feet from back of sidewalk going along Santara Way. The last waiver that I want to discuss that staff had them do more analysis for us is the waiver to private outdoor open space. Your city code requires that each residential unit have 150 square feet of private outdoor open space, which is basically a patio or a balcony. And they are providing patios or balconies for every unit, but not every unit meets that 150 square foot minimum. So this exhibit that they created is showing us that if they did put a 150 square foot patio or balcony on each unit, it would shrink the size of their interior courtyard, and it would push the building further back from Santara Way, which is just the opposite of what the plan requires in another part of the plan. So that concludes my discussion of concessions and waivers, and now I want to get into some of the architectural issues that we can discuss. So in your Santara Way specific plan, your plan requires and asks for a well-defined base. And it describes a well-defined base as thicker walls, richly textured materials like tile or masonry, and special materials such as ceramic tile, granite, marble, and or darker color materials. And then this exhibit comes, or this figure comes from the plan. So the applicant, in meeting this standard, has provided the following. They've done a 5-inch horizontal lap, And then their well-defined base is changing the siding from a 5-inch to a 7-inch channel rustic and separating that with a 4-inch trim. And if you want to look at your plan sets, it's sheet 2.2B, which shows, you can look at this closer up. Anyway, staff wanted to talk, we wanted feedback from the committee. Do you feel this proposal meets how the plan envisioned a well-defined base? And I apologize for how blurry it is, but this is the best I could do, showing the same elevation with and without their well-defined base. And basically, the biggest thing your eye catches is that there's some trim that separates the two different siding types, and one facade versus the other. So that's the first item that staff wanted feedback on.
Do you want our feedback now? Should we? Or finish your?
I think it would be best to see the whole,
Okay.
see everything first. I would interject here that the applicant, well, I'll let them speak for themselves, but I don't think they necessarily think that this proposal is the best thing architecturally. They are trying to meet the standard, and if the committee voted to recommend that the architectural base be something different, then that is something we can take to the Planning Commission. So it doesn't have to just be base or no base. It can be a little bit broader than that.
Could I ask a question real quick, just so I don't forget as we zoom along? On the waivers about the private open space, that the code requires 150 square feet, what is in the proposal of how many square feet per unit?
It varies. And on page 36 of your packet, I think I show the range. Yeah, the range number 9, so that they range from 114 to 136. And there is a handful of units that meet that 150. So the next item is building materials. So this Santerre Way specific plan encourages a list of materials, and this comes right out of your plan: wood board siding, wood shingles, tiles, stucco, stone, brick, split face concrete, masonry unit. And behind you today is materials board from the applicant. So I put it back there so you could all look at it. Staff feels that the materials are appropriate for the site, but I wanted feedback and wanted to share that with you. Another item in the Santerre Way specific plan, it encourages architectural styles that match Cotati's regional style and climatic response. And the intent would be to shelter and protect visitors from the elements such as sun and rain. And it calls for shallow roof pitch and deep eaves. This project has a flat roof, which is also allowed in the specific plan, but without the deep eaves, what is lost is protection of visitors. They have proposed cantilevered awnings along the street frontage at the building entrances, but it's not totally protected all the way around the building. And staff, again, wanted feedback: is this adequate to meet what the plan calls for? And the last item to discuss today is the open space in the plan. So the developer is going to retain ownership of this property, but build it as a public park. And the reason it is that the developer is retaining ownership of the property is because they are proposing to place 2 bioswales, drainage swales within the park, and I've depicted those in that orange color up there. Other than that, they've given us this very conceptual plan, which shows sidewalk connections, which staff thinks is really important to get visitors to and from the future train station and the residences. And they've shown, kind of what it would look like with some landscaping. The plan, Santerre Way specific plan, has standard, I guess, or requirements for this park area. They want it to be multi-purpose lawn, hard surface areas. They want a monument, a public art or water feature within the park area with formal or monumental plantings and seating. So this plan shows some seating, but again, we want feedback from the committee. Is this going in the right direction? What would the city like to see for this future park? And then as far as staff's review goes, the one condition that we have asked for in the plan would be to put a sidewalk. I just drew it up there, you can see. Put a sidewalk to separate the park from the parking area. So when you park your car, you're not walking across the drainage swale. You actually get to walk onto the sidewalk and then into the park. But requiring the sidewalk would then move the drainage swale, which would make the park a little smaller. And then how do we feel about that? They are providing a sidewalk along the parking spaces to the, my north, south, east, west gets mixed up, to the west. So we are matching that standard. So that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer questions.
Okay, any questions of staff? Sally?
The first question is on the low-income units. Is there any stipulation that that's spread within a mix of unit types, or would they be able to just make it all the one bedrooms be the low income?
That's a great question. And so on page 34 of your packet, it shows, is that the parking spaces? That's the parking spaces.
Okay.
Oh, it's in my conditions of approval. It's in here. But we've thought about that, and we've codified it by putting in the conditions of approval, which are page 66 of your packet.
Okay.
And so, these are conditions of approval that would run with the project, and at the same time, they're also required to submit to the city an affordable housing agreement, which would also further codify this and make sure all these units are available for a period of 55 years.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I didn't see that before. And then I have another question that's a little more particular about the base of the building, because as it's described, it's just a change to the width, the height of the siding boards. But in the illustrations, it makes it appear that it's a thicker material, that it's got some depth, some increased depth to it. But that, I just wanted to see if that's just artist's license in the drawing, or if it really is actually going to be thicker.
Yeah, I think we'll have to pose that question to the applicant. I know one of them is well-versed in the proposal.
Okay. Okay, thanks. That was it for now. Thank you.
Eris, and then, okay.
My question, so you were talking about the requirement and the waiver around the shelter from the sun and stuff. And so I just want to make sure I understood that what is being proposed does shelter the entrances to the building and it just doesn't go all the way around. Is that correct?
That's correct. Okay. I think the point Lori was making is that without the roof overhangs, the entire building, that is the balconies and open windows, aren't protected, but the entryways are, yes.
Jay? Your mic.
At the park area where you want the sidewalk that separates the parking from the park, does that swale have to be there? Is that a requirement, or is there an engineering need for it, or can it just be surface drained?
There is an engineering need for it. I know the applicant's engineer is here, so we may pose the question to him as to whether there's an equal alternative. If you want to...
Catch basins or something.
Yeah. Yeah, I think at a staff level, I think we thought the basin would be a little harder to plan around than a linear feature, but that's certainly something the committee could advise us on.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I've got a bunch of questions. First, on the unit count, they can increase to 63, and then I guess the next 9 units, or, no, 65, the next 9 units of 74 are a staff option or something like that. That's the way it's described. And it seems like the very low income has dropped below the 11%. I'm just wondering if the 11% could be maintained, or why that's the unit, or the percentage has dropped.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. We should have mentioned that. So they've met the basic requirement, and then in addition to all the qualifications that they had to meet in the analysis that staff did, there were, in these building configurations, there are space for 9 more units. So the applicant is asking for 9 additional units as a bonus, and staff worked with them. So they are entitled to ask for that across any income spectrum. They could all be market units. They could ask for all market rate units. Staff worked with them to provide those units as affordable as well. And the breakdown of those is in your packet, as well as 6 moderate and 3 low income. So, but I see your point that when you take the overall units together, the percentage declines, the percentage of very low declines. We looked at it the other way, that said they met their basic requirements, and the 9 units could go forward. The Planning Commission could decide not to grant 9 units, or anywhere in between.
Okay. Well, I guess my recommendation would be is if they just shifted 3 of those units from very low to low, you're meeting the 11%, and you're meeting the requirements. So it's just a small shift.
One point of clarification, state law is very clear that 11% is only required of the base unit, and the base unit is 48. So it's 11% of 48 has to be very low income.
No, I understand the requirement versus the suggestion, that they maintain the intent. I have a lot of design questions, but why don't we?
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I'm not concerned about the base, just from an architect. They're modern buildings. I think they're interesting design. I know there's contextual stuff. They're not contextual. I don't think we need to make little micro control over those issues. I think there's bigger issues sort of to deal with. That's just a personal take on the design. I've got some bigger questions, basically. One is on the orientation of the walkways through. It seems like there's the intent to go through to the park, but those actually look like 3 to 5 foot wide private entries to units, and I think that's not a very positive design. I mean, I would be happy, for them to go around the building to the park on the sidewalks and be in the public areas. Those access points on building number 1 were divided into 3. The intent is not for that central access, but to go through the 2 small ones and to the sidewalks in the park. And I think that's, I would consider those private spaces if I was living in those units, and I would not want, and if I was coming through from the other building, I wouldn't want to go through those small sort of entries to go to the park. I would seem like the more natural way is to flow around the building.
I apologize, Committee Member McConnell. I'm not sure I tracked all of your comment because we were flashing through here, but are you talking about the orientation?
Okay, I'll be more specific here. So from B2 and B3 going north from the central plaza between B2 and B3, and then there's a sort of a grade area across the parking that leads to building B1. And then the circulation is to split east and west through the corridors to go to the park. Is that the intent of the sidewalks, the location of the sidewalks in the park, the schematic, is for that circulation to flow through there?
Yes, and the applicant has provided a mounted exhibit that we had asked for and they've prepared, which is a pedestrian circulation system. So I'm going to...
Consider a fact that
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
great, thank you.
So there's those two segments through B1 to lead to the curvy walkways in the park.
So residents that are living in the upper levels of B1, I think could come through the internal corridors and exit out on the north side of B1 for easy access to the park. But I agree with you. I think the perception of folks living in B2 or B3, which are the buildings further south for the benefit of the public, they would probably take the exterior sidewalks, the sidewalks that go around.
Okay, that's clear. It was confusing to me that it seemed like those access points were made to be for B2 and B3. I have a lot of comments on parking. Do we want to get into that? Or, okay.
I'll leave to the discretion of the chair. There
Yes.
could be further issues about buildings, and we could group them that way, or we can just take them committee member by committee member.
I think the way we're going right now, going through the issues, and it will, questions may come up later that are going to be answered now, so go for it.
Okay. Okay, so I'll just open the whole parking question. One, the diagonal parking on the main access is approaching. You need to turn around and go, and it's a narrow street. And so I think at a minimum they need to turn around down the street to come back to actually get into those parking spaces. I don't think they'll be able to actually turn into them on that narrow street. There's parking on street parking. I just don't think it's practical parking layout for the street parking. I know they're trying to squeeze in more parking, and I think I can appreciate that. But I don't think it works the way it is without some sort of turnaround on the street. That's going to be a constant problem with people trying to get into the diagonal parking.
I'd point out that on the very same A1 drawing, there is a cul-de-sac at the end of Centera Way. Obviously, the existing occupants need such a thing as well. It's a cul-de-sac. So,
okay.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
If it's okay with you, we can respond to the questions as they come up, or comments as they come up, if it's okay with you to have a more free flow than what we might normally have. And the only comment I would make is that the specific plan envisioned this cul-de-sac as a traffic calming measure. So I think the applicant would agree with you that perpendicular parking would probably be easier for folks to access rather than going down to the cul-de-sac and coming back. The specific plan has specific street sections that are allowed, and one of them allows you to use parallel parking. It strongly recommends the angled parking, and I'm going to look to Lori about perpendicular parking. Perpendicular parking is not a standard, so we had asked the applicant to design to one of the specific plan alternatives. So that's why you're looking at the angled parking. Is the plan is supposed to work together with the angled parking and the traffic calming and of the cul-de-sac and the narrow street. That's not to say it's not without issues. I fully expect people will be trying to get into those spaces as they drive south.
Okay. And along those lines, they are providing more parking than is required. And it seems like if they do go to parallel, they could eliminate some spaces. My other issue with the parking and also limiting some parking spaces, there's a couple issues. One, they want to use non-permeable materials as opposed to what's required. And I would think if they provided more in the compound, if there were some fewer parking spaces and those were places where water could gather and they could be, French drains or more planting, it would be ability for them to still go with the non-permeable, with still having area drains so that the water could soak in. And the swales in the park, I guess, are supposed to address that as well. Is that what the engineering is about? It's not clear to me.
Yes, and I think these are good questions that we'll want the project engineer to speak to explain. We've talked about the design in quite a bit of detail, as you can imagine, and they have a combination of treatment facilities, and if it's okay with the committee, I would like the project engineer to get into those details with you. I think it would be more accurate and better depicted if we let him do it.
All right, and just at this point here for the committee, it's 5:30. Our meetings are normally an hour. I've been given to understand from our planning director that we can go longer, but I want to ask if the committee, are we good for another half an hour? Okay, and we'll evaluate where we are at 6 o'clock. Okay, so please continue.
Okay. And just on that parking issue, there's, and also related to reduction, maybe more screening, there's a couple dozen units at the ground level that all, or excuse me, a couple dozen bedrooms at the ground level that all face parking and directly. And if there's some reduction in the parking and greater screening between the parking and those bedrooms, I think it would go a long way to making it a harmonious place and not have spaces don't seem to be assigned, and they're going to be random spaces and people coming in late and shining their lights into someone's bedroom. I think it's a problem for the success of the project. So I'll stop there as far as parking and move on.
Okay. Lars, do you have any comments, or Jay? No?
I have one sort of more general question about the area. If the existing development that's there next door, I assume that's met the specific plan as well in its development?
It does, yes. The projects that are out there right now represent the maximum density plus also a density bonus on portions of it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm just thinking even of the architectural detailing related to the climactic issue. I think it's pretty difficult for a roof eve at 3 stories to shade pedestrians. And if you look at the neighbor parcel, it's not doing that either. So I think just as a comment, it's to hold this project as a standard like that when the neighbor's not doing it, maybe it's just a standard that's too hard to achieve anyway. But so I just wanted to sort of confirm that history of that project.
Yes, so far as the record shows anyway, that project did not ask for concessions from those design issues.
Thanks. Actually, one other question related, Mike started to touch on the permeable paving. So the applicant is asking is an exemption from that requirement based on the soil condition, is what I gather. So has that come up previously on site? I imagine, if money was no object, the soil could be mitigated, compacted, et cetera, to allow, to make it all work. But I don't know what the staff's view is on that whole issue. Do you have any comments on that?
The specific plan encourages the permeable paving, where all the other, the waivers that we've gone over, those are all requirements. So when it's encouraged, it's different, and we've asked them before about doing permeable paving, and what I wrote in the staff report is what I've heard when we have asked them to incorporate into the project.
What I would like to see is a soils report specific to that site. I know there's a lot of clay in the area. I just don't know if that is a broad statement or a specific statement to the site.
And we can have the project engineer clarify for us.
Okay. All right, I have a couple of questions myself. On the waiver item 1, I'm sorry, but I don't know what the acronym FAR is. I know the word FAR, and I'm sure it means something, but I didn't find that defined anywhere. So what is that?
That stands for floor area ratio,
Okay.
and I'll let one of the architects on the committee elaborate, but basically it's a design ratio that's used for lot coverage. So a floor area ratio of 2 to 1, for example, could be a 2-story building on a lot that's 100% covered. So you can use varying floor area ratios to leave more open space and at the same time go taller. So again, it's a ratio of the built square footage to the lot itself.
Thank you. On the third waiver item, the reduction in smart buffer from 16 feet to 8 feet. A while back in my career, I was trained as how to not die working near a Union Pacific Railroad, and that's sort of colored by that safety requirements that I had. And like 8 feet was pretty much minimum from a freight operation. This is a passenger operation, but still, I don't understand the need to. I don't understand the need for that waiver. I'm sure there is one, but I don't get it. I'm wondering what was the rationale behind that, and perhaps the applicant's engineer can explain that, or even if the staff has a comment about that.
Well, I think the basic statement is that they can't obtain the density in this configuration and maintain that setback. And I'll let Lori elaborate on this. The specific plan has, I think, at least 2 different setbacks from the right-of-way based on what the use is. I will also say, and so it is less for different types of development. And I will say that during the process, we realized that the city has a sliver of land between this development and smart right-of-way. And so we've worked out with the applicant that the city would, the property is not of use to the city, and it could provide an enhanced buffer for the project. So the city is willing to give over that property, which is about 5 feet wide. So it would extend this, if the project is approved, it would extend this 8 feet to 13 feet.
No, it's still only 7.5 because it was 2.
Oh, I'm sorry. I should let Lori talk about the specifics. She's telling me no, it would only make it 7.5 feet wide.
Just to, for consistency, the city did approve a smaller buffer for the smart buffer with the built project that's out there, and this proposal basically matches what's out there to the south.
Okay.
Or someone who understands FAR but not what a buffer is that setback from Chatsworth?
Well, The 8-foot was about as close as you would want to be to an active railroad operation. And it has to do with the fact that in freight operations, sometimes things are hanging off the freight cars, and it's not a good place to be within 8 feet of active railroad tracks, period. Now this is a buffer, so we're not really in that zone, but that was my reasoning for the question. I wanted to know more about that.
Yes, and thank you for bringing that back up, because this buffer that we're talking about is on the private property side of the right-of-way. So SMART has ensured that they have what they need to meet PUC requirements in their right-of-way, and then this is a buffer further in from that.
Yeah, right, which acts as also noise issues and so on. Okay, so those are my questions. Eris?
Yeah, so I had just a couple of comments. I'm just really happy to see this project come back in general, and most of the waivers and the concessions I don't really have any problem with. One specific question that you addressed to us was about the issue of the base being well-defined, and I don't think the change from 5 to 7 inch really accomplishes that. I'm not sure how much I care about that aesthetically. It doesn't meet the guideline, but I'm not sure that I really care. A question or concern that I have actually has to do with the buildings with the commercial on the ground floor, and this is because I'm a co-owner and a manager of a mixed-use building. And the bane of my existence is complaints from the residents upstairs about noise from the businesses downstairs. Now, with the office space and leasing office, that's not an issue, but I'm wondering what may be in place if you're having a gym, which is going to be noisy with weights dropping on floors and things like that underneath residential units.
And thank you for bringing that up. We had not discussed that with the applicants, whether there was extra building insulation or whatever the proper mechanism would be, so we can certainly ask that question.
So at this point, go ahead.
I actually have one more question. It kind of goes back to the commercial space. I was wondering if there's a clarification or a limit to the amount of that commercial space that's going to be occupied by the leasing office, because it seems sort of like that's a separate entity, because it would have to be there anyway. So maybe that was listed in the packet, but I didn't see it. What proportion would be the leasing office versus other commercial space?
Yeah, and I'll ask Lori to clarify the exact square footages if she knows what they are. We had not thought to limit it that way. I understand your comment. And our reasoning was just simply that they aren't required to have an on-site leasing office. They are required to have an on-site manager. In the conditions, they'll be required in their management plan to have an on-site manager, but they're not required to have an on-site leasing office. So in the future, that function may go away.
Any other questions? Okay. Your mic.
I have an overall question or comment on the density, the trade-off for reducing the required private space. And actually, the question is in the unit breakdown. In my experience, and my experience admittedly is more urban than up here, it seems like a really low one-bedroom count and a really high three-bedroom count in terms of what the market is. And the trade-off being that with the extra bedrooms, we're sacrificing private space, we're sacrificing some setbacks, we're sacrificing some other issues that we're trying to squeeze on, the sacrificing going from 2.5 to 3, which is, a requirement. And I know the pressure is there economically to squeeze as many bedrooms onto the site as possible. I'm wondering if that is a response is a true response to the market, and is it actually necessary to do so? And two, would the city benefit with some similar number of units and affordable units with perhaps smaller square footages? I guess the question really is in the breakdown, and is that reflective of what the need? So.
When we analyze what we think we need in terms of a unit breakdown, what we go by is our average household size, which is determined by the census, and the city's current household size is 2.44, essentially 2.5 persons per household. So we're generally looking in the smaller unit range. Having said that, we do have an identified need for units that accommodate larger household sizes than that average. So what we're looking for is not so much, as far as the affordable units go, what we're looking for is not so much the impact on all the other facilities as we are what households they will accommodate. And in that sense, the numbers don't seem that out of whack. Now, part of what this committee can do is reflect what they know of community mores and conditions, and if the committee feels that a different mix is appropriate, we can certainly take that forward.
Yeah, it's more a question than a suggestion. I'm just not sure if that meets the target, and particularly in a high-density environment near public transportation. It seems that there may be a greater need in that environment for smaller units.
From the city's perspective, one of the things that we've tried to acknowledge, plan for, and interject into our analysis has been the knowledge that many of the units out there existing not only on Santera Way but in the general area serve the student population. So we've been very cognizant all the way through of ensuring that if that is the population, then what are the appropriate amenities for them, what is the appropriate management scenario that the complex needs to operate under, what are the parking ramifications. So we've been cognizant of that all the way through. And yes, I think with the larger units and student income levels, it could be that there are multiple student households here that are not necessarily qualifying for affordable units.
I have one more comment. I just wanted to say that I think that the internal circulation of the buildings to get to the units is better than the version that we saw last, because it seems a lot simpler. So I just wanted to say that I think that part is improved.
All right. I guess I would like to hear from the applicant, and I would most definitely like to hear from the members of the public who care to speak on this item. So,
hi, I'm Neil Rudolph. I represent the applicant, the Colvin Group. This particular project is one where we have spent over a year working with Vicki Parker and Lori McNabb, solving multiple problems so that we ended up with a project that we can feel very, very good about, and a project that will meet the needs of the community. It tends, like all problem solving, to require much more listening than talking. I'm that person in our group. And so what we heard as the key issues was parking. We heard that all the time, actually, parking. Open space, circulation, and the fact that this particular project is next to a train station for a train that is in fact coming. So all that has to be factored in. Then you lay on top of that the Santero Way specific plan, unfortunately, is a specific plan. There's actual specifics to it. And so in several parts of the solution, we had to come up with ways of dealing with the specific plan. We put together a team that we think has people who are tremendous problem solvers, and two of them are here today. Guy Chambers, who leads our architectural side of the firm, and David Brown, who's here from Adobe. And they'll answer the specific questions of the DRC, but I did want to say two things. Thank you for arranging a special meeting for us today. That was very, very nice of you. And I also want to thank staff who have spent way too many hours answering questions for us, and we've spent probably not enough hours, very honestly, answering their questions. They've done a tremendous job. Thank you very much. Guy Chambers will walk you through some of these design questions you've got. He'll go first, and Dave Brown will come after him. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
As a retired architect with 40 years' experience, I've learned through the years that architecture is the art of compromise. I've had certain ideas, and the staff have had certain ideas, and the community obviously has certain ideas, and hopefully what we've come up with is something that's a reasonable compromise on all levels. Reorienting the buildings, I have my feelings about it. I think the solution that we're proposing today is a terrific solution. It meets a lot of the requirements of the specific plan. It's different than I originally proposed. I think that's fine. I think that's terrific. As to specific detailed issues, such as the base of the building, I think having an architectural vision that this was much more of a kind of traditional agrarian, and I think I've talked to you before about this, the fact that what we were trying to do was not present to the community one long monolithic building along Santero Way, but something that was broken up into a series of visual buildings, a series of almost townhouse, vertical kind of row house appearance to it. And I think that has a very, very handsome quality to it. That's obviously my opinion, and I think it's a much better solution than, as I mentioned, a megalithic building that just simply has a flat plane that's all parallel to Santero Way. I think it also stitches in much better to the fabric of the existing community. I think sort of ins and outs and articulations and all that sort of stuff are very important to begin to develop pockets for planting and have a certain rhythm going down the street, and that's what we've tried to do. To get to the specific issues of hip roofs and overhangs and all that sort of stuff, we had a curious kind of problem where we had to have some sort of response to the fact that the specific plan said you have 2.5 stories, but without any definition in terms of what 2.5 stories was. So what we came up with was simply a proposal that said we would try and stay within a maximum height limit that exists on this site, and that necessitated an architectural solution that began to develop a top to the buildings and actually a flat roof kind of scheme to where we're not, continuing the height of these buildings. They're very much in scale with the buildings across the street. As to the specifics of the base of the building, once again, my personal response to that is we have a specific plan that has a specific vision that this was going to be a much more commercial neighborhood. And what we have found through studying this site for many, many years is the fact that the need for any kind of office or commercial in this area, in Ronan Park and Katati in specific, is non-existent. It's really non-existent. So we've made what we think is a reasonable compromise to come back and propose the 5,000 square feet, located appropriately as we can to its proximity to the SMART train station, and the hope that people would come there and park and maybe even go to their dentist or, make a copy of some document that they needed to take to work. We don't know the specifics of how that will be leased up, but we see that as a commercial or office enterprise, but very limited once again. To get back to the base of the building, I think you can see in Lori's fuzzy document, and that's through no fault of hers, is that whether you have a base on these buildings or not, it, in my experience as an architect, it doesn't add anything, but it is in fact a legitimate and realistic response to the requirement of the specific plan. When we originally came up with the idea of trying to do this water table and, you know, change the scale of the boards at the base, it actually exists within this community right across the street. I think if you look out into the sheep grazing area and that lovely little old historic building over there, believe it or not, it has a horizontal base of a certain scale, a water table, and change in scale above that. So it's a very traditional way of treating a base of a building. There are lots of other issues here that I think we could delve into rather than continue the meeting, you know, ad infinitum and talk about each of the specific details. What I would like to be able to do is just simply, hopefully, have a much more open dialogue where we can answer your questions. Dave Brown, the civil engineer, is here also, and hopefully we can give you additional insight into some of our thinking in our proposal.
I'm very good with that, and we did have questions that were raised in our comments, so if they seem to focus on the engineer, so if you care to step forward and identify yourself.
Good evening. I'm David Brown, Adobe Associates, civil engineer, land surveyors for this project. I guess I'll start with the most difficult one, the permeable pavers. We do have a soils report for the site, highly expansive soils throughout the project site. With expansive soils, you want to try to keep those soils consistent moisture content, because when they do get moist, they expand, and when they dry, they contract. And you don't want that to occur over buildings, under buildings, or under paved areas. We could put permeable pavers in here, but what ends up happening then is that subgrade material, made of mostly clay material, expands, blocks off water, so you have no more infiltration. Then the base material fills up. In order to make sure that you still have permeability, you got to put a subdrain in there. When you put the subdrain in, you're basically getting rid of the opportunity for more infiltration. You also have to put in cutoff walls around the perimeter of that permeable paving, so you don't have water migration underneath the buildings to then expand the soils there and cause cracking in the subfloors of those buildings. So we have a different method of treating and having infiltration by using tree pods throughout the site, and we feel that that's a better approach in this particular site because of those conditions. I think one of the other questions you had was about the bioswale in the park and whether that could be eliminated. Certainly that could be. Some alternative to that could be done. The challenge for that is that particular swell is treating the water that's running off the public parking lot. And so it's going on to a private parking or a private park, or it's a public park on a private property maintained by the private property owner. One of the alternatives is to put a tree pod in that parking lot and have that parking lot drained to a tree pod, and then the park is much more opened up. That puts that maintenance responsibility then on the city to maintain that, which they don't want to do, I'm sure. And so we're open to other alternatives. There's certainly different ways that can be handled. It could be moved. If there was a walkway that wanted to be put in there, it certainly could be moved. The walkway would make the park smaller, but it certainly could be done. So we're open to looking at other alternatives. I just want to make one other point about the parking. Perpendicular parking actually is much more efficient along this project frontage, but because of the specific plan, it's shown as angled parking. You actually provide more parking when you do perpendicular parking. You will have the people that are going to come down the street and make a 175-degree turn to get into those, it's no doubt about that's going to happen. They're not going to go all the way down to the end and turn around. So that will happen, and you won't ever have that on the west side of Santero Way, because it's all parallel parking now, and that's not going to change. So I'm open to any other questions that you might have in regards to drainage or infiltration or.
I appreciate your follow-up, and I would just say whatever creative ways you can come up with to address the water and keep it sinking rather than running off would be great. And I understand that permeable parking is not the best solution, but there are other ways that you're trying to address it.
Can I ask a question about the parking? Wasn't there also an issue with the fire access on that street? Like if it was perpendicular parking, that's deeper than diagonal, right? So
Actually, this minimum street width today is different than it was when the previous project was approved. So there's actually parallel parking that's going to be eliminated along the frontage of one of the sides of that road, and that's why additional parking is actually needed. But we'll still maintain 26 feet minimum, which is wider than it is today.
If I could just clarify one statement that Mr. Brown made, which we didn't elaborate on this earlier and maybe should have. This area here in front of the park, the existing park, so not the proposed park, which is here, but the existing park. The park does have parallel parking in front of it, so each one of those parallel parking spaces is, longer, takes up more frontage. And those spaces are partially restricted for use because the road is more narrow than what the fire district would like to use with their current apparatus. So the applicant has worked extensively with us to try and solve the road issues and the narrowness of that. And so there are two large fire access response issues that are addressed by the applicant in this. And one of those is with the replacement of parallel parking to angled parking in front of the park, those spaces will no longer be restricted. They'll be open 24 hours a day, which they're not currently. You cannot park there at night currently. And with the access through Depot Way on the north side, that gives the fire department a secondary means of access to the development. So those are both things that staff raised as issues, and the applicant has helped us solve through this design.
And one thing to the committee here, we are now past 6 o'clock. Are we okay to 6:30?
So,
Okay.
just to wind up, with respect to both parking and the park. So since we came in front of the Planning Commission over a year ago, the team has pulled together two pretty significant transactions. We purchased the land that is now of the proposed private park to gain the open space. And we arranged a structure for building the parking out on the city's space, the space in blue. When you add up all of the parking that is required for this number of units using the city's requirement, you need 134 spaces. Before we touch any of the blue area, we have 138 spaces. This, in the world of developers, is the famous two words, it parks. I just learned that, by the way. However, with the work on Depot Way and the work on the city space, we get to 181 spaces. That's about 35% greater than what's required. I also wanted to touch very quickly on the work that was done between the city and the developer on the below market rate units, because I know that was a question. So it is requiring us to solve a 3-variable math problem, which we solved. So each and every unit reflects, whether it be in low income, very low income, or moderate income, reflects proportionally to the total 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom of the entire process. So that's 6 variables moving in space until we got it right. And there were a lot of charts that went back and forth. So I do want you to know that we spent quite a bit of time on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there, to the committee members, are there any questions else that we need to ask the applicant staff?
Yeah, I have a question. Does the city see it desirable that the applicant is providing extra parking spaces or not? Is that desirable? So it might be undesirable.
Yes, thank you for asking the question. Typically, in a smart growth priority development area of Plan Bay area, the answer would be no. What we've acknowledged, however, is that we've acknowledged one reality, which is that residents in the area struggle with enough parking as it is right now today. There's never enough parking, and that stems from a variety of issues. One is the low specific plan requirement for parking because it assumed a mix of uses and therefore joint use of the parking that was there. The second reason is the train hasn't started, so we don't know how many trips might get reduced and how many automobiles might be left somewhere else if the train, when the train starts running. And third, the use of garages for storage rather than parking. So those are three, and I'm talking about existing development. This development doesn't have garages, but those are three challenges that exist out there today. And so we've tried to address those through a series of requiring an on-site manager who is responsible for managing the parking of this development, trying to fix some of the parking and access issues that are out there now with the roadway in its current configuration. And third, asking the developer and the developer agreeing to build out this city-owned parking lot, which because of the monies it was purchased with and the demise of redevelopment can only be used for parking. So the developer has agreed to build that out for us to provide more parking to the community as a whole. So I just want to reiterate that this is not parking that is required for the private development happening on public property. That's not the case. As the applicant said, they meet their parking requirement in their development and on the street adjacent, which is allowed in the specific plan. And this would be extra parking to the community. So for those reasons, yes, staff is supportive of it.
Any other questions on that? Okay, at this point I'd like to open this up to public comment. And if anyone has wishes to come forward and speak on this issue, please come forward. Need you to state your name and your address.
Good afternoon, thank you. My name is Helen Bradley. I live at 6323 Santero Way, and I just want to speak on parking. I know that in this new development, in the new proposal, that there is in excess of what is supposedly needed in terms of parking. But the realistic issue on Santero Way is that parking is really, really problematical. It's not just problematical, it's seriously problematical. Already people are parking all the way up to the SMART train station. They're parking all the way down to the roundabout that you're talking at the end. It's chronic and it's only going to get worse with this new development. So I would encourage you very strongly not to think that, okay, they've given us more parking than they really needed to, so there's some flexibility there and we could take some of it away. You really shouldn't be looking at taking it away. You should be looking very strongly at managing the parking on that site and just ensuring that there is adequate parking, because the realistic situation is that those 4-bedroom units are being inhabited by 4 students, all of whom have 4 cars. And if you're looking at 1.75 cars to a 3-bedroom unit, that's just nonsense. It just doesn't work that way there. And if you're looking at SMART to be absorbing some of the traffic, we don't need a car because we've got a SMART train station. Well, for a start, Americans don't usually use trains. So it's going to be a miracle if SMART actually absorbs a lot of that traffic. I really wish it would, but I don't see that the American people are going to give up their cars, because SMART only goes to the city. It doesn't take you to the grocery store. It's not taking you to the movie theatre. It's not taking you to college, because you don't ride a bike. You've got to get to college some way. So realistically, people are still using cars. They're using way more cars than you've got an allowance for in those rules that you're working by. So please do not stuff it up and take away those car parking spaces, because we really, really need them. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else care to comment? Seeing none, I will close public comment on this. So I think this is where we have some discussion, folks. In the way this packet is laid out, there are questions proposed to this committee specifically on a number of the points we've already kind of talked about. And as a way to structure this discussion, I was feeling like we should probably go through each one of them. These were, I believe, Lori, your questions, I believe. So is that a reasonable way to proceed, or you just want to move to discussion here?
Makes sense.
Okay. So the first one basically is about the well-defined base, if I read this correctly, and is the design as proposed meeting the intent or regional style and climate protection? That's a little broader, but that's the question that's being asked. This is on page 37 and 38. Yeah, am I missing? All right, let's take let's provide any comments on the base that we haven't discussed.
Well, I'll start.
Go ahead.
I can understand the reasoning for asking for the base, but in this case, as it's presented, I don't think it works. So I think I would prefer it without the base, or maybe with the base being used in some areas, maybe on the corner buildings on the wraparound, or to me, as it's presented now, it's not working.
Okay. Any other comment? Yeah, you know, I sort of, every project that I have seen that has addressed a specific plan or a plan requirement, it comes up with the same thing. I want to change it because today I have a different feeling about what it was, and I don't know the reasoning that went into it. So I'm leery of wanting to change it because it was planned, it was agreed to, and all of that. But I have the same observation here. I just simply say why, and I don't see it aesthetically one way or the other. But again, as a response to the plan, and we're not here to change the plan, it's a reasonable response. That's the way I see it.
To me, it's a response that doesn't satisfy the premise of the purpose of having the base. So to me, it's more detracts rather than adds. So I think if the architect for the building should, I hate to just have them provide a base just because we want a base when it's not really part of the architecture that was initially devised for those buildings. So I guess it annoys me, to put it plainly, and doesn't seem like it belongs on that building as it's shown. So.
Okay. These are comments going forward with the Planning Commission. Okay.
I'll just add to that. In the question, as it's put in the packet, I think if we change the color of the trim or that base, it would be even worse.
I agree with that. I actually, this is again just splitting hairs, so I don't want to weigh in on the architect actually. But I don't think it provides a base. I do think it provides some articulation, and that provides some visual interest. I don't think it addresses the issue, and I also don't agree that the issue is important in this case. And I'll just leave it at that.
I would agree with your last agreement.
I think the image is very telling, right? Like, the image on the left is what the specific plan had in mind, and we are so far from that in the image on the right. I think it doesn't make sense.
On a 1 to 10 scale of importance, I think this is like a half.
Okay. So let's move, if it's all right. I think I've used the phrase beating a dead horse, but I don't want to do that. No. Let's move on to the next question, which is the design as proposed meeting the intent of regional style and climate protection?
No.
I'm sorry? What page? Oh, I'm sorry, 38. 38.
I would say, to my comment earlier, that the climate protection issue is not, we didn't see it in the neighbor buildings. It's not a practical issue. It's not a it's not a solvable issue in a overhang three stories up. I think the canopies at the doors is a nice architectural feature that will provide shading at the entrances. And that's a good gesture, one could say, towards this requirement. But I don't think it's in a way similar to the last item. It's just, it's hard to satisfy the requirement of the specific plan.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Any other thought on that particular question? Okay.
Well, I just say generally, so that's about the roof or the climate, but generally it's asking about the overall design. And again, like the last slide, clearly we're not trying to do Katati craftsmen here, or the architects have not proposed that. So to try and overlay that on this building just doesn't make sense to me. I think it's an architecturally handsome building. It has a lot of interesting features, and that's what we can judge it on.
Okay. So the next question, if we move on here, is the overall design and choice materials forward Katati style is guided by the Santara Way specific plan? Maybe you just sort of addressed that, Lars. Yes. And the answer, yes, is from what I can see, yes. Should the city require permeable pavers? If so, where? We did have input from the city engineer on that.
Project engineer.
Project engineer, my bad, okay. And I worked for an engineering firm for 20 years. Oh, my goodness. After the discussion that we've heard, how do we feel about that as a recommendation to the Planning Commission?
I would say that it's not realistic in light of a description of the site conditions. It's just not realistic to require the permeable pavers, and the runoff and collection of runoff's been addressed, aside from the permeable pavers.
Or feel similar to that? Okay.
Yeah, the intent of the permeable pavers is sort of a broad sweep, and I think what they're trying to do is address the specifics of that. And so just that it's clear that we're not just saying don't worry about it, we're saying address it in another fashion that is more sophisticated than just that blanket sort of permeable paver solution.
Okay. The last comment or last consideration that was asked of us is this is where we tie all the knots here, perhaps. Is the concept the applicant is proposing going in the right direction? Are there features and amenities that should be considered, and what type of public art or water feature should be considered, if any? So that's 3 questions. So is this going in the right direction, folks?
Well, it's specifically asking about the park, I think, and this is what.
Thank you.
This is, right, yeah. I would weigh in that there's not that much to look at to say, is it going in the right direction? I mean, it's a very simple schematic plan, very simple landscape plan. Say, where could we have public art, or like, could be anywhere. It's hard to say, like, put it in that round thing in the middle, or put it on the left, or put it on the right. It seems like we need a lot more direction about what this park design is to really comment on it from my perspective.
And Mr. Chair, if I could interject just quickly, and the park is deliberately conceptual so that it could go through the public hearing process. So what is set in the city regulations, the base regulations, is acreage and not what improvements are appropriate to particular neighborhoods. The specific plan adds these, the specific plan encourages these particular features, recognizing that the plan overall is meant for heavy pedestrian activity, mix of uses with people milling around, obviously the SMART train where folks might be waiting to catch the train, that kind of thing. So really what we're looking for here from you is what you think might be appropriate amenities in this park, in this location.
Okay. I would, not remembering what's in the existing park to the south of this area, the thought came up, is there a tot lot somewhere nearby or a playground type of thing? Is there already existing? If not, it might be something I would be interested in seeing there.
There is the specific plan, or excuse me, the park that's existing is largely turf with a play area that has a play structure in it. So it's I forget the acreage off the top of my head. I think it's about 1/3 of an acre. So it's a fairly large open turf park.
Okay. Then I would suggest, I mean, in a park like this, which is not really large, it's nice to have a place or two to sit down, and a water feature, fountain, something like that would be something to rest and consider the train, perhaps. I don't know. And any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, a train sculpture would be great, whatever it's related to the particular area. To me, it looks like circulation surrounded by green areas rather than a park with some circulation in it. So that could be, just as long as that's if that's the intent, then it meets that intent. It's not a place where people will sit and relax and rest. It's a place where people will pass through and have some greenery around them. My personal suggestion would be to have, there's sidewalk above, there's sidewalk below with a small area. I don't think it needs a lot of crisscross pedestrian as well, or maybe one cross from one corner to the other, something to the central area. But as a diagram, it doesn't provide with a lot of public areas to rest. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing either. It's just, I guess you need to clarify what the intent of the park is, and how if the other park is serving people that are resting and playing and that sort of thing, maybe this is just a green area that approaches the train station.
So when I imagine myself in that space, because I am waiting for the train or having lunch at the space that's there by the train station or whatever, is I always like not just something to sit on, but that whatever that is, the bench or picnic bench, is actually facing something visually attractive. It's amazing how often the benches in parks seem to be facing the ugly part of something, but and possibly shade, whether that's trees or a structure when it's sunny. And I like the idea of some kind of water feature or something that has that sort of white noise thing that would cut down on the sound of the traffic or the train.
I'd just like to add, thanks for clarifying, Vicki, but it's a very urban sort of setting, so thinking of it as a plaza more than a park might actually be an interesting direction. Sort of occurs to me like it might be better to switch the parking in the park, and so you have the park next to the train, and you're not sitting in a park looking across a bunch of cars to the train, but maybe that's just way out of line, or impossible to do. But I think thinking of the park more in an urban way could connect the parking and the train in one whole kind of language. It can be very much a hardscape park.
Just as a point of clarification, yeah, we were working with a hard requirement, which is the long-range property management plan that we're required to submit to the state does only allow parking on the northern parcel. But
Those
go
are-
ahead.
Pardon me. Those are the questions that we were asked to discuss, and we have. At this point, I would ask if any further discussion on this item. Do we want to make a motion on approval or denial of preliminary design review? What do we want to do?
Well, I'll move to approve it.
Is there a second for that? Second. Any discussion on that item? The preliminary, the motion, I believe, is the approving the preliminary design review of the proposed project with our input to the Planning Commission. That would be, yes.
So all of our comments, so for example, the base, we didn't like the base, so we're not approving the base. We're just approving the project with the comment that we don't like the base, basically, to put it bluntly. Like, is that what we're doing?
Based on what I've heard from the discussion, I would summarize to the Planning Commission that here is the project. These are the changes or modifications that were suggested. These were the waivers that the applicant was requesting, and this is how the Design Review Committee viewed those waivers. So as it relates specifically to the base, it's okay to grant that waiver because the base was not important to this particular design.
Just backing up, is staff requesting approval? Or is it staff requesting comments? Mm-hmm.
Staff is requesting preliminary design review recommendations. So yes, one of the official design review opportunities that the body would get, this body would get. So it goes to Planning Commission from here with a recommendation, with the action being final on the project along with this committee's recommendations.
So should I amend my motion then that, oh God, how do I word this then? That aside from our specific concerns, which are enumerated in the minutes, we approve the rest of the project waivers and concessions? Is that do it?
No, I think your recommendation, or excuse me, your motion was fine. The body is voting to recommend preliminary design review approval to the Planning Commission. That's the motion as I interpret it. And so staff will incorporate the waivers as appropriate from your comments onto the recommendation. So they'll either be outstanding or not. And at this point, it looks like they won't. There'll be an across-the-board granting, recommendation for granting the waivers and comments on the park.
Okay, I would say that I wish the discussion on parking from all parties here is one that will continue to need to be addressed moving forward to the Planning Commission and the City Council. I'm not sure that we have a good recommendation on that. There needs to be enough, and the project needs to meet the existing conditions in the area. So I'm not trying to amend anything here. I don't have a solution here, but it needs. I think that's something that continues to need to be worked going forward in the approval process.
And I will say, if the committee feels that maybe we needed to structure this into two meetings, one to address the issue of waivers and one to really discuss the project on its own merits with the waivers built in, we can certainly take that additional step if we've asked for too much and too little of time.
It's your motion.
It's my motion. No, I don't feel like you've asked like too much, and I've mostly heard positive things about the project. We've got the couple of concerns. There's a concern about parking, which actually I'm not sure if is even really within our purview. We've got we've had input about the park, things we'd like to see in the park, and I heard that none of us are really thrilled with the base, that aren't really saying anything specific to do about it. Those seem to be our three main concerns, and that everything else everybody seems fine with. So I need to try again to turn that into a motion.
So no, we have a motion. It's been seconded. This is the discussion of the motion. Any further discussion of the motion? Would you please call the roll?
I think my concern is also with density, of the sort of the extra bonus density. And so that's a concern of mine. And so if we're voting to approve the whole thing, I would vote no. I would vote to have staff massage this a little bit further in terms of working with the developer on all the issues. But if it's an up or a down, I will.
Okay.
Well, is that, like you said about parking, is that our purview, or is that a planning commission issue, really?
Yeah. The parking as established in the specific plan is the requirement. So those are the base regulations. So long as the applicant meets those requirements in the locations that are required, it's an up-down vote. The discussion of is this an appropriate location for extra parking? Is the perpendicular versus perpendicular versus angled parking the right way to achieve that? Those are all design issues that I would think this committee could and should weigh in on. Changing the ratio requirement would require an amendment to the specific plan, so something that we couldn't recommend the Planning Commission do without a bigger work effort.
But what about density? You said density in terms of housing units.
No, specifically the exemptions or the special requests are reduced private space, increase in height, increase in, those sorts of things all affect kind of the massing and the overall. So I think in my view, the exemptions or the requests need more staff input and back and forth with the developer. I mean, but the overall issue is there some pushback from the city as far as the density or desirability in terms of some of those other ones, the 9 issues that are being requested as beyond in addition.
And I think an honest answer to that question is purely the development is not what the specific plan envisioned, and that's why so many of these issues get down to how appropriate is this anyway. It's because we're starting from a place of it's not what the specific plan envisioned. Having said that, the applicant is 100% entitled to take advantage of this state density program, and along with that, the concessions and waivers that they feel are appropriate. So the waivers that you've weighed in on tonight is what we needed to hear, whether they make an issue to the, whether they make a difference to the overall design and quality of the project or not. And I think at this point, the density issue, which you're absolutely right, it drives most of everything else, so it's hard to separate the two. But from a pure density standpoint, the only discretion is those 9 extra units, and what size and income level they're restricted to.
Yes, go ahead.
So I'm going to hold down the opposite end of the spectrum, is that I not only am okay with the extra density, I actually like it. I think, we just heard the last city council meeting, a lot of people talking about concern about more affordable housing in the city, and, this achieves that. I live and have most of my adult life in fairly dense multifamily housing, and it can be great. It's something a lot of people are afraid of, but I think it can be a positive thing. So, I think overall this is a good thing for Cotati, and including the reduction in the commercial space. We've got a lot of empty commercial, retail space in town. Do we need to build as much as was in the original plan? I don't think so. Speaking as someone who's got empty commercial space I'm trying to fill right now. So for a lot of reasons, I think this is a really good thing for the town.
If the architect could address that central space, it seems to me small and potentially dark and uninviting. So that's what I'm concerned about, the density, if it's an architectural issue. That between building 2 and 3, what's your feeling on that relative space? The horizontal, the north-south courtyard.
You'll have to forgive me because I'm in love with very small Italian towns with little tiny streets and 4-story buildings. To me, that generates a lot of that community and interaction between people. I think that the ratio of width to height here is something that we've tried to be very, very sensitive to. And I think as a proportion, it's a very, very handsome space and an interior space. So that's my own architectural bias based on experience and having traveled, around the world. I find those places far more attractive myself personally than suburban housing, single tiny little 1-1-1-1 housing across the landscape. I think from that perspective, there will be people that are renting here. I'm assuming, and certainly as a developer, we're assuming that that will be attractive to a certain market, and I understand. I personally don't live in a very tiny little space. I live in a normal, house kind of thing in a normal residential neighborhood. So I think that the market hopefully will find this an attractive space. We've spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to activate that by having those buildings that are permeable to where you can get from Santero Way into that interior courtyard out to the backside. I think it potentially could be a very lovely, vibrant space, handsome treatment in terms of landscape materials, benches, passive spaces. And I personally worry a lot less about that issue that you raised relative to private open space. I think that if that private open space is too small to house your party of 20 people, maybe, they go down and we'll certainly manage it, but have that party out in that, interior space. Those are all things that are manageable. But relative to the issue of what's the scale of that space, I don't think I'd push buildings farther apart by any means. I think what you do to have a successful and exciting and vibrant community is you actually pull them a lot closer than you normally would. That's my personal opinion.
We have a motion on the floor here, and the time is we're well over time here. So I would ask in Liz, any other comments you might make? If not, please call the roll.
Chair Morgan,
Aye.
Vice Chair Weaver,
Aye.
Committee Member Connell,
Aye.
Committee Member Glendinning,
Aye.
Committee Member Langberg,
Aye.
Committee Member West.
Aye.
Motion is approved. Thank you. Thank you for sitting through a very long meeting of the Design Review Committee. Okay. Any reports from staff?
Just a couple, and I will keep these brief since you all have put a lot of work, a lot of mental effort in tonight, and we appreciate very much. In terms of private projects, I think the next couple projects that you'll be seeing will be actually another project by this applicant and another subdivision further south on Old Redwood Highway, the edge of town. So those we're still in the process with those and haven't targeted a meeting date yet, but they'll be coming. And in terms of public projects, so just since we have so much construction going on, I thought you'd like to know where in the process we are. So hopefully you've had a chance to look at the vertical walls that are going in the public plazas that you all evaluated in February that were in your minutes. So those walls started going in last week, and they'll be finishing up over the next week and a half, and the mosaics will happen. The mosaics will be applied after that. So the trees started going in last week, the street trees, and I think those look awesome, personally. And the street lights will follow shortly after. And then, as you all probably remember, we have a lighted crosswalk at La Plaza on Old Redwood Highway. That's a component of that project also. And it will be going in probably next week, start the work on that next week. And then for some of you that live in the area, the South Old Redwood Highway project has been going on for a few weeks now. That's resulted in some need to close Old Redwood Highway periodically, but that is a complete replacement of the pavement. It's going to dig out all of that crumbling and noisy, in some cases, asphalt and paving, and get rid of it. And there will also be a lighted crosswalk in that project at Page. So those are two really good safety improvements, as well as the bike striping that will happen on Old Redwood Highway with the Northern Gateway project. And as talking to street trees, you probably noticed that 116, we now have those street trees in and the median plantings in there, so that's looking really nice. And our favorite project, my favorite project, the open space next door, that project, I hope it's turned out as you all envisioned it. I know there's been a lot of people really enjoying it, so that's heartening to see. The picnic tables went in today, and along with the water station, and then the interpretive sign is another few weeks out, but there will be 2 of those installed. So that project has really turned out. The fencing is a little heavier than what I had envisioned, but it's made for livestock, so I guess it's appropriate. So
To keep them in or to keep them out?
Could be both, although we have turkey wire, I think. So that was just a quick update on projects, and thank you all very much again for accommodating a special meeting. We appreciate it.
All right, with that, and without objection, closing the meeting. Thank you.